Stand and deliver. Oh yes, that famous phrase usually linked with outlaws. Also a lyric from a 1981-82 song? But highwaymen, they were kind of like landlocked pirates really, weren't they? And there's one particular highwayman whose story is really quite intriguing. Not just because he lived quite a colourful life, but also the mystery surrounding his final whereabouts. It's the 15th century, and the rolling hills separating Wales and England is a quiet landscape of farmland and little market towns. Far away from any of the battlefields and medieval strife of the time, this quiet rural setting seems all very safe and orderly. But looks can be misleading. Oh, there are secrets. And few of these secrets are as shadowed in mystery as that of Humphrey Kynaston. The son of Sir Roger Kynaston, a nobleman of standing and some reputation, Humphrey was apparently a descendant of the Welsh prince Bleddyn ap Cynfyn. The Kynaston family lived at Middle Castle, a stronghold built for power and prestige. However, Humphrey was a restless spirit who could never be caged by walls of stone and duty. And he would often get himself into scrapes and bother. But scrapes and bother would become a little bit more than that on the 20th of December 1491. Found guilty of murder of a certain John Hughes, Humphrey was declared an outlaw by none other than the king, Henry VII. And so, despite being married and having children, Humphrey all but vanished from polite society. He was on the run. Only to re-emerge, reinvented if you will, as Humphrey Kynaston, Highwayman. The man once destined for politics and wealth had another path to follow. One that involved riding across the countryside under a blanket of silvery light and wanted by the crown. Needing to keep his head down from the law, he swapped the grandeur of his family estate for a sandstone cave near the village of Nescliffe. And this cave would become his fortress and new home. A fireplace, a chimney carved into the rock, and even a stable for his horse Beelzebub. It was also perfectly situated for his new endeavour into law-breaking. You see, this part of the world was very busy with wool merchants who would buy Welsh produce at a number of surrounding market towns. And Oswestry was one of these important trading centres. And being a hub of trading meant that there were lots of merchants travelling to and fro with lots of gold and silver in their pockets. And this resulted in all manner of new opportunities for, let's just call them, the less desirable members of society. The village of Nescliffe, with its high wooded hill, was just the place for any enterprising highwayman to relieve traders of their wealth. Lying in wait on the hilltop, they had the perfect vantage point with which to spot approaching merchants. And being such a lucrative little spot for these activities, just east of Nescliffe, a pub called the Wolf's Head would become a well-known meeting place for all manner of criminal types, and would also become a regular watering hole for Humphrey. Oh yeah, he'd really found his spot and vocation here. With his legendary horse Beelzebub, Kynaston would ride the narrow, perilous trails around the cliff edge, routes so treacherous that no pursuer dared follow. Locals were initially terrified, but would soon become sort of fascinated. The rumour mill would produce all sorts of reasons for Humphrey's apparent impunity from the law. Maybe he had supernatural powers, some would say. How else could he vanish into the woods and hills with such ease? Stories of his exploits would echo far and wide across the countryside. I mean, yes, he was a robber, but he wasn't a ruthless one. In fact, and much to the frustration of local law enforcement, Humphrey was being referred to by some as a sort of charismatic rogue. Villagers whispered about his strange code of conduct. He robbed the wealthy, but he left the poor alone. and some claimed that he even left silver coins on the windowsills of poor families. So, was he a thief with a conscience? Or was he a criminal who just wanted to become a folk hero? Either way, he was soon given the nickname Wild Humphrey. His fame and infamy grew with each passing year, but the authorities were relentless. And yet no one could catch him. It was suspected that Humphrey had allies. Commoners who saw him as a symbol of rebellion, of justice. Others insisted that it was just pure cunning. Whatever the truth, Kynaston stayed free, while sheriffs and bounty hunters combed the countryside and couldn't find him. By the early 1500s, the legend had outgrown the man. Ballads were sung, children acted out his escapes, and somewhere in the shadows of the hills, Humphrey Kynaston watched it all unfold, alone, aging, but undefeated. But what became of him? Here the facts begin to fade, replaced by rumour and uncertainty. Historians agree he lived many years beyond his outlawing, perhaps even into his 60s, which was no small feat for a man who'd been hunted for decades. But his final years? Now that's where the mystery deepens. One account claims he was granted a pardon later in life and allowed to live in peace. Some say the king himself was intrigued by his legend and chose mercy over punishment. But no record exists to confirm it, and as yet no royal decree has ever surfaced. Another version tells of a quiet death in obscurity, possibly in a remote farmstead or even back in the very cave where he once ruled the woods like a ghost. Some claim he was buried in the village of Grinsill, under a nameless stone, as anonymous in death as he was famous in life. But then there's a third story, a tale passed mouth to mouth, never written down, never proven. According to this version, Kynaston faked his death. Tired of the chase, he staged a final act. A body burnt beyond recognition in a cave fire, a saddle left behind, and Beelzebub gone. Villagers mourned, the law rejoiced, and the search was called off. But weeks later, a merchant in Wales was robbed by a rider on a jet black horse. And then, nothing. No more sightings, no more stories. Just silence. Could it be that Kynaston escaped England entirely, sailed to France? Well, maybe there is something there. A document of the time might just leave a clue to one of his last known movements. So according to this, a certain Humphrey Kynaston, accompanied by Thomas Trentham, entered France in the King's army on the 16th of June 1513. In other words, Humphrey appears to have been made a captain, and Trentham his petty captain. What happened after that? Who knows? Perhaps he lived under an assumed name in France. The mystery of his whereabouts in his later years will probably never be solved. But what we do know is that Humphrey Kynaston, despite being a man born into nobility, chose an outlaw's path over that of a lord. And amazingly, the sandstone cave from where he built his legend still exists to this very day. Whether a highwayman, a folk hero, or exaggerated myth, he carved a place for himself not just in the sandstone of Nescliffe, but in the fabric of British folklore.